politics with the collectivism of an all-inclusive governance system. We should be less interested in sharing posts and focus more on bringing the best brains together to accelerate Ghana's development. When the president holds the absolute power of public appointment, doesn't mean that winner takes all is cast in concrete. Good evening and welcome to Tarzan's Take. Having recognized that our current governance system is fostering an unhealthy and divisive climate that is undermining the peace and cohesiveness of our country, what do we really mean by winner takes all? And why should we complain about the natural consequence of competitive elections? What are the feasibilities, the pluses, the minuses of the many suggestions and proposals for changes to the existing governance structures? Should we not be looking beyond who appoints whom to what office in our quest for all inclusiveness and equity in our national polity? But how do we affect the ongoing constitutional review process to achieve a more just and equitable democracy in Ghana? Before we sit down to answer these questions, we would like to show a short commentary that will help to set the context for our conversation.
No great improvement in the lot of mankind is possible until a great change takes place in the fundamental constitution of their modes of thought. John Stuart Mills. In the days leading up to the judgment of the Supreme Court, and around the time that the whole country was immersed in the call for peace, there emerged a diffuse mantra for power sharing and condemnation of what was perceived as winner takes all. There is nothing in the Constitution of the United States of America. Yet, when Barack Hussein Obama was elected president, he nominated his closest internal political rival, Mrs. Hillary Clinton, to the position of Secretary of State, a position with towers even above that of the Vice President of the Republic in terms of global presence and influence of American foreign policy. When Obama got the nod for the second time, he went for John Kerry as Secretary of State. Therefore, this phantom and demonization of winner takes all does not appreciate our unwillingness to open up to talent, recognize merit, and move on. We cherish blind loyalty and fundamentalism above competence and performance. For unlike the United States, we in Ghana have a constitution which, through the directive principles of state policy, proposes the fair distribution of public office beyond partisanship. It is supposed to be a blueprint for a democratic development, and the President is enjoined mandatorily to report to Parliament what is being done to achieve the objectives, particularly the right to work of all Ghanaians. Article 34, Clause 1 states that, quote, the directive principle of state policy contained in this chapter shall guide all citizens, Parliament, the President, the Judiciary, the Council of State, the Cabinet, political parties, and other bodies and persons in applying or interpreting this Constitution or any other law, and in making and implementing any policy decisions for the establishment of a just and free society. Unquote. Under Article 35, Clause 6, it is stated, thus, towards the achievement of the objectives stated in Clause 5 of this article, the state shall take appropriate measures to foster a spirit of loyalty to Ghana that overrides sectional, ethnic, and other loyalties, achieve reasonable regional and gender balance in recruitment and appointment to public office, and also to make democracy a reality, where in these are presidents restricted in appointing only people from their political parties. But when we even dismiss boards, and key personnel of public institutions, including banks and hospitals, and replace them with party activists who may not be more competent. That is a weakness that has nothing to do with winner takes all. The cries for reform must not be related to ministerial appointment. It has all to do with the needless dismissal of otherwise competent individuals because they do not belong to our party and we did not appoint them. So they have to leave when governments change hands. We do not need any law to do what is right, but to allow every Ghanaian equal chance of serving the people beyond elective office and ministerial appointment. It means that we would not replace the heads of security institutions merely because there is a change of government. Beyond human resources, when are we going to give meaning to the provision under Article 35, Clause 6E, that we must take appropriate measures to ensure that whenever practicable, the headquarters of a government or public institution offering any service is situated in an area within any region, taking into account the resources and potentials of the regions and the area. In this wise, Mr. Yao Bwedu Ayabuafo suggests that the first to move out of Accra must be Ghana Cocoa Board, probably to the western region. While the identification and discussion of issues provide the means of seeking redress, we must stop the talking and do something positive. Therefore, we must walk the talk and ensure functionalism rather than empty theory. This commentary was originally written by Mr. Yao Bwedu Ayabuafo and published in the Daily Graphic.
Welcome to this edition of Tarzan's Take. Winner takes all. What does it really mean? We have a very representative cross-section of our society today. The man of God, my Archbishop, my namesake, Charles Pamabako, Metropolitan Archbishop of Accra for the Roman Catholic Church. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
We have Ms. Samia Nkrumah, Chairperson of the Convention People's Party, a succession of father passing on to daughter. Welcome, Samia.
Thank you.
And we have Dr. Emmanuel Acquah, Institute for Democratic Governance, Executive Director. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you.
Fairly representative of our society. What do we really mean by winner takes all? I will want us to develop a common idea of what we mean by winner takes all before we get into the substance. Samia, what do you understand by winner takes all?
Well, as I understand it, we are referring to a situation where the ruling party has the power to appoint, and it also has the power to confer rights and privileges. You know, the right to appoint and the right to confer privileges on whoever they wish to do so.
Is there anything wrong with that, do you think?
There is, if certain conditions are missing.
We'll come to that.
Yes, indeed.
My Archbishop.
I would like first and foremost to ask whether it is really in print, winner takes all.
No.
I think it is more an impression which unfortunately has been given a certain credence because of certain things that have happened. That is why the impression is that constitutionally the winner takes all. I doubt whether our constitution really says the winner takes all. That it gives power to the president to appoint and the rest of it does not necessarily mean that it must be from just the president's own political, persuasion or party. I doubt. This is my first take on it.
Fantastic. Doc.
Winner takes all. I think probably inadvertently the Constitution does that.
Yes.
It does it in a way that if you want to see where the winner takes all, it's really winner takes all. It is not in Parliament, because in Parliament, all the parties, once you get in, you have a role. And they share seats and roles and all that. First deputy, second deputy, chairman of committees and so on. So nobody talks about winner takes all in Parliament. But we do talk about winner takes all when we are looking at the executive branch of government, where executive governance takes place. And there you find out that the design, okay, of the institutional framework of the executive arm of government enables only one person to be elected. We call it the presidential system. But there are presidential systems globally where you find out that the president is elected, but also mayors are elected. You find that even in some cases, especially the federal systems, the governors are elected. If you take Kenya, for instance, Kenya is a unitary state. Under their new constitution, the president is elected, provincial governors are elected, mayors are elected. So if you compare that, and in fact universally, all democratic systems, elections of political leaders take place in two organs of the state. In fact, I must say that even in some countries, they are beginning to elect Supreme Court justices. And what you see is that members of parliament are elected, the legislature, call it Congress, whatever you like, or parliament in the UK, people have different names. But also in the executive arm, more than one person is elected. We have designed a system where it is only one person who is elected. So, and the one person who is elected is then given enormous powers. The rights and privileges Mr. Samia Nkrumah referred to, it's there, but also how it's been used. Yeah. And I agree with His Grace Archbishop that it's not written that if you're president, you should govern only with your party, and you should only appoint your party people. But a certain understanding, a corrupt interpretation of what this institutional arrangement is, has become endemic and an integral part of our system. So that the president, our elected president, struggle against party pressures when they want to appoint people from other parties. But also look at how the informal rule, how if you come to power, and it's a carryover from our history, political history, the authoritarian regimes, the fight in the 50s and so on, we have a notion that if you are in the opposition party, you have a philosophy that makes you incompatible totally with ours in the ruling party. So we can't govern with you. So you must stay out. But you don't only stay out, you are pursued. Your businesses could collapse for unseen reasons. People don't find jobs. I have talked to people in either side of the divide, especially the MPP and the NDC, who happen to be in opposition at one time and in government at another. And they'll tell you how difficult it is for them to find jobs. They go through interviews, they pass. In fact, they are the best candidates, but they never get the jobs. And they never get their loans. And they are jobless. This aspect is not written, but it is practiced, it's done. And I think at the end of the day, it has not helped us choose the best who could assist our presidents to deliver their visions for the country. And we've all come to a certain conclusion that this practice and the design of that institutional framework in the executive arm of government is not giving us the best. In fact, it is the reason why our parties don't work together, because you alternate the system. We like the alternation. It's my turn. If it's not my turn, I stay out. So you come. But we ought to design a system in the executive arm where parties, different parties, have spaces to occupy through elections, and they would be forced to work together. In fact, they do work together. You hear red and blue in the US, they work together. Yes. President Obama is working with a lot of Republican governors. In fact, some even support him. Governor Christie of Philadelphia, and so on. And you find it also in other countries. If you go to the UK, which is a monarchy and therefore a unitary system, you find out Labour and Conservatives operate in different ways and so on. So what is it that makes us not think that if you are NPP or NDC, your philosophies are so different. You all want to serve one country called Ghana with its nation, and yet you can't work together, and so on. And I think that is the flaw of the design, but also what we've inferred from the design as practice.
Good. It's great. I mean, you said it's not written down, but it's practiced. And of course, in doing the research for this program, what struck me was that, in fact, the President of the United States has a lot more power in terms of appointment, even almost to messenger level in a department. And yet, they tend to look for people from the other side for very high positions. For example, the last 2 defense secretaries have been Republicans. So, if it's not written, why do we pursue it?
In fact, I definitely agree with what Dr. Acquah said, that the practice,
yes,
unfortunately, for quite a while, has given that impression. But I believe very strongly that even depending on how it's written in the Constitution, if there is a certain mentality that reinforces a certain misinterpretation and misapplication of it, then we have a problem. Yes. And I think that is what we are suffering from. This mentality, unfortunately, is very atavic. It comes from, it's very, call it this way, egocentric, which moves on to become clannish, moves on to become tribalistic, moves on to become ethnocentric, and gets into become partisan politics. It's the same, sorry to say, human attitude that has been allowed to continue even into the macro sort of cosm of the society. So I'd like to say this, that much as I believe a constitution is never going to be a perfect instrument, the history of a people also helps to do a certain interpretation of the constitution. We in Ghana, unfortunately, have not reached that stage. Maybe let me say this. First and foremost, I want to congratulate the country for how far we have come. We've come really very, very, very far, to the point that politicians of different political parties sit together, have fun, and the rest of it, which is already very, very beautiful. Yes. And they discuss and they debate. The political awareness here in Ghana is very strong, so we have to congratulate them. But we must move the next step. And I believe that is where a certain ethical and moral formation comes in. What is a nation? What is the sovereignty of a nation? How do we all contribute to make the nation a sovereign nation, and therefore each one of us have something to contribute? When it comes to that feeling that the country belongs to all of us, there are people who are as good on the other side as on this side. Why can't we consult with them and do? We might not necessarily even appoint them in, but we do consult. At least that's what, if we want to use the American system, you see that the American president consults as much George Bush as he would consult,
Jimmy Carter
exactly.
Or somebody else. Yeah.
This is the beauty of a historical development that has come to it. I hope and pray that, I have no problem about people wanting to make sure that in the Constitution it is couched so that, let's say, you don't only vote for the president, you may vote for A or B. Let it be written. But what I would like to see is, if people do not have the right attitude towards political power as a call to greater service for the entire nation, then whether it is written or not, unfortunately, we are even going to get 2 people at loggerheads in the parliament if, let's say, you have election of, let's say, the president, and you have election, let's say, of the district, municipal chief executive. Yeah. We are going to have an impasse, a situation where we won't go forward because of this cultural mentality that we'd have to get over. That is what I'm looking at.
This is very interesting. You are not a politician, you are not a politician.
Yes.
I have been, and hopefully I still am.
Who says I'm not a politician?
Samia is. Yeah. You know what happens? The players, the political players, are the instruments of this tension. Because if, for example, somebody was to suggest that, let's say President Muhammad was to suggest that Samia or Yakubu should join his government, members of her party and my party would raise hell. I mean, the leadership, the idea that you're going to work with the other side. So, I sort of take the reasonableness of the non-politicians and buttress it against the reality of the the political players.
Yeah.
Well, really, the issue, I mean, I'm sure perhaps you are approached either individually or through your party. And do you see this in your party and in your experience?
Yes, but Doc, yes, that would be the headlines tomorrow. No, but Doc, you see, it's not a question of personalities from a different party joining the ruling party. What we must focus on are issues. Because you can, for example, the NDC can decide to invite a member from the CPP to serve in the government. But what does that really serve? How does that benefit the people of Ghana? Because if you just take personalities, it's those individuals who will benefit. But what about considering issues that the CPP is championing? Why don't we focus on certain issues? Now, if we all agree, different political parties, on a national development plan, that successive governments, it doesn't matter which party.
You see, for me, the problems of water, electricity,
of course,
they are all
these are paramount.
Common.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
They're common. And for example, if, listening to, let's say, the presidential debates, I came away saying, oh, maybe your candidate should become Minister of Agriculture, for example. Your candidate for the presidential position. Because I felt he articulated and understood agriculture better than anybody else.
Yeah, but it's no use him becoming the Minister of Agriculture if the policies, our policy line on agriculture is not implemented. You see,
But is your policy line very different from anybody else? Feed the people.
Indeed, but I still think that different political parties can contribute to national development if we listen hard to what they are saying.
I think what
we, for example, we, for example, believe in a national development plan.
Okay.
If we agree, all of us, different political parties, we agree that education is paramount. Improving our human resource is paramount. Let us take the ideas from the different political parties that will serve that objective. We've all agreed on that objective. Why don't we mobilize different political parties, listen to what they have to contribute, and try and implement them? You don't need to take people to become ministers to do that. We would rather you take our policies rather than
your people.
It's a very interesting contribution. So it's a very good intro into His Grace's suggestion of a union government. What precisely do you mean by the union government?
Before we go there, I thought Samuel was making an important point. How we've gone about relating to parties in government is the problem. We have to define a rule. For instance, if you take Parkway Syndrome, he was appointed by President Kufuor, and then it's like, this is national government. And his party was not consulted. Okay? The practice is that the president, as president of Ghana, must have latitude to choose whomever could help him deliver the vision for the country. But you don't do it anyhow the way we do. You focus on personalities, and then you pick them and you say, well, this is inclusive government.
Chuck Hagel was nominated by Obama, and his own Republicans didn't like him.
They have a different system altogether.
Presidential.
Charles Hagel has been advising President Obama for a long time, even when he was in the Senate and so on. They look at competence, and they also look at what positions he's going to represent, and so on and so forth, and what he can do for America becomes so important. Then they were not fighting his not. When they delayed because of certain statements he's made, much more than you're a Republican going to serve a Democratic Party president and would not allow it. But we don't have the rules. In some countries, for instance, at the end of the day, it's the voters who decide. If you take the UK, the Liberal Democrats governing with Conservatives, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you say, what? Is this possible? It's not. But you see, their parliamentary system, which is a Westminster, prime ministerial, there is a magic number you must get. in order to form a government. If you don't have it, I think in this case it's about 326 or something.
It's 50% plus one.
Yes, roughly.
50%.
Now, if you don't get it, then either they go back to elections, which nobody would advise given the state of the economy and all that. So which party then would you get the numbers from? And if you're going to get that party to join you, then the discussion of inclusiveness begins with policy.
Oh yeah, they do sit down.
They take their
actually
manifestos,
negotiate.
look at where ideas merge.
Absolutely.
And the late President Mills, in 2009, actually I think he addressed his, I don't know if it's the ministers in Akosombo or something, where he said that he thought they should take ideas from the parties and put it together. I think when they were preparing the GSGDA. And some people in his party thought, hey, this is heresy.
No, but can I...
Permit me to say something about that. First and foremost, about this union government business. I didn't say that.
You didn't say that.
I was talking about consensus building.
Yes, yes.
You see, we've reached a certain
Absolutely
stage. Let's be honest about it. Look at the two political parties that we have. It is 50-point-something%
And
with
49.99.
No, so let's be honest about it.
Yes.
You just cannot say we are only going to take our views and exclude the others. It means you are ruling a country without 50% or 49% of the country coming.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is that the time has come for us to start building consensus. And the reason why I would say this one I stand correction. Ideologically, unfortunately, since the what do you call it, the collapse of the the Iron Curtain, there's hardly any distinction in the various ideologies. When you take the American system, which I agree with 100%, the American ideology is America first, whether Republican or Democrat. And so when the president comes, he looks at who will favor America first, and therefore he uses, and people easily understand. Some time ago, the ideologies were very, very distinctive. Liberal capitalism and so-called, social democrat. They were very distinctive. But when you go now back to the British system, as you're talking about, the liberals and the conservatives in Britain, why can't they make a majority to run but coalition? It's because recent development, even in Europe, if you look at it, it's only coalition government that are running. People are now getting to a point where it is not the ideology they embrace, but they look at what we call the common good and how whatever party is at stake will deliver the common good. And I think this is where we fall a little bit short. We pay lip service to ideology a lot in Ghana, as if there is a real distinctive ideological coloration between NPP and NDC or CPP and then it is only in the mind. On the ground, in reality,
the conservatives.
Oh no! I would say on the ground.
There are no more conservatives. President Kufuor.
Well, I just going to say the conservatives introduced social interventions and the social democrats tax.
But they agree on the capitalist system.
Yes.
You see, they all agree on the economic model.
That's right.
And how that model would help now tackle the social
problems
issues
that we have.
is where you find the differences. Here. Whether we like it or not, the World Bank, the IMF, has pushed us in a situation where that is the model we're operating. Okay, now we say mixed system, market, and then you can also have the public sector and so on.
Aren't we pushing self-actualization needs so people don't have water and electricity and all those kind of things that we are talking about?
Indeed.
Mixed systems.
So we have a fundamental argument.
No problem.
No,
I was just, in fact, I was restraining myself
please.
from interrupting.
Please, go ahead.
Please do. It's a conversation. Because, please.
Unfortunately, we are ignoring the fact that ideology does matter. Good. And one can say that some parties, like in my opinion NDC and NPP, have a very similar ideology. But we, a different party, we think that this model we've been pursuing for the last 30 decades is not helping our people. It has not delivered the basic needs to our people. So we believe that relying too much on trade liberalization, on the new liberal model, has not helped Ghana and has not helped many developing countries. So we are suggesting even a radical departure from that. it doesn't mean you are going to stop and overturn everything, but you're going to focus on certain aspects.
But doesn't the NDC in opposition spout exactly what you're saying?
I don't know. I was hardly here when the NDC was in opposition. All what I know is that when the NDC was in power from 1992, they did not resist the excessive dependency and reliance on prescriptions of the IMF and the World Bank. And I think we have not benefited from this dependency. So let us take a closer look. Let us review that. Let us step by step start going back to our self-reliant approach. The main problem with our country is the lack of a development plan that successive governments will adopt, and they can adopt it in different ways. If the NPP is more capitalist, to use an outmoded, like the bishop said, term, yes. So if we agree education, free and quality education is important, let the NPP come up with its plan. Is it increasing or helping private schools? Whatever it is. Let the CPP come up with its plan, which is promoting state schools, but at least the objective is the same.
But we do have a National Development Planning Commission. Why isn't that? Why isn't the membership of that commission?
We have refused to look at this a national plan that will endure. There are certain issues, like the bishop said, where we can reach consensus. We don't need successive governments to come and overturn everything and start all over again. And like you rightly said, let us prioritize the well-being of the individual Ghanaian. We have not done that yet.
I will definitely say that is what is at stake and what is lost.
Yeah.
The well-being of the ordinary Ghanaian, the individual whose sovereignty actually calls it, emboldens the national sovereignty. Unfortunately, whenever people get into positions of authority, unfortunately, they lose sight of the general and the common good. And that is what some of us feel everybody who gets there should have his or her attention called to. Then I would link it up with the fact that there is the need for a certain national development plan and policy, so that at least you know that this is what it is. Whoever comes is measured according to how the party performs.
Yes.
And then, so
I would reserve my comment and then come to, because I think it is instinctively difficult when you're trying to practice democratic governance and practice. But you said something, and I think this is very important. I mean, I've been watching the run-up to the German elections, for example, and they said, absolutely, Merkel is going to win. It's a question of who she's going to govern with.
Yes.
So, perhaps, have we made a mistake in adopting a system which instinctively places too much power in one person, or as opposed to the issue of Europe, where proportional representation almost always means that governments that emerge, even after competitive elections, have to work together?
Well,
you are the governors.
Thank you. Just not to lose sight of this very interesting discussion we just had.
Yeah.
I think that the realities have changed, and both parties, really, you have a bit of the capitalist idea or policies in NDC, and you have a bit of the social democratic in the NPP. Actually, if you look at it seriously, President Kufuor moved NPP to the center, where it became even more social democratic. If you ask NPP what its successes are, it will start by telling you about national health,
school feeding,
and so on.
Socialist interventions.
And in fact, the campaign that said free high school education.
Yes.
And interestingly, you found out that criticism against that came from NDC. That's the left party. So our parties have found...
a bishop member, they don't mean anything.
Yes,
sorry to say so.
Our parties have found common ground.
Yes.
We need to articulate that. The consensus has evolved in certain ways. We have not pulled it together consciously for it to be that which is accepted by both, that this is in the national interest and we should pursue.
Where I feel sad is that which is accepted by both. This is where I get worried about. You see, people sit on this is where I am worried about ideologies.
Yes.
You know, ideologies have become a no-go area, and they sit on it, and they do not enable themselves to relate with the others in a very osmotic sort of way.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the time when we would be trading ideas, not the ideology.
Yeah. But aren't we taking this discussion too high? I mean, Doctor,
why?
The reality is that people take power and they appoint their cronies. They don't talk about ideology. They will shove away people with competence simply because, in Margaret Thatcher's language, they are not one of us. You know, I mean, is it ideology we're talking about?
Coming back to what we're discussing.
I don't know if we have time to go into ideologies, but
No,
you see, ideologies become derogatory, serve a negative purpose when the idea you are espousing, does not relate to the realities on the ground. It's your belief that is driving. Ideology is also theory. It is science.
Very.
And ideology will begin criticizing the economic system, like Samia had done, because it is not serving the purpose. It's not solving the problems of the country. And therefore, they will put an alternative view. But if the reality has changed, that you have record that something is not working, but you are still subscribing to it as a creed. No, socialism is the highest form of, and so on and so forth. Then we'll tell you you're ideological. It means that you are not looking at the reality and how we can move forward.
But isn't the bishop's reality that it doesn't?
No, but I
don't matter.
I think I agree with the bishop that I think the point I was making is that between the two parties, you cannot tell the difference in policy. Also, because the framework within which they operate, whether they like it or not, you have market and public, so-called. Now they call it PPP.
Public-private
partnerships driving things. So you've settled on something. Indeed, both ECOWAS and the AU have endorsed the neoliberal model. That is, the market economy is what will drive Africa's development, and our leaders have signed on to it, and so on. And then you also would have to look at the social development aspects, where education, health, employment, and other things have to be contended with, and so on. So there is a lot there are lots of areas.
The point I'm trying to drive at is that the reality we are dealing with is that the winner takes and shares the post without thinking of ideology.
Let's go back to your question.
Isn't that what is happening?
The question you asked, the question about Angela Merkel and the possibility that she might rule with the Social Democrats, and they are not. Yes, the system is designed, but again, it's determined by the electorate. If she gets all the numbers she wants to meet the magic, number, she would go ahead without the social. If she doesn't, then she has to. But the system already places, even if you get the majority, there are two other parties whose strength. Because you never get the magic number.
Yes.
But
the question I'm driving at is whether we've picked
we've not.
We've
not necessarily. We've not. I think what it means is that executive power in Ghana is not anchored in parliament. In Germany, it is.
That's the point I'm making.
Yes, it is. And in Britain, it is. In most of Europe, it is.
Most of Europe, it is.
It's anchored there.
Yeah.
But if you take the presidential model, then you would also have areas where the legislature would have executive power is anchored in the legislature as well, because electoral colleges also determine who becomes president in the US.
Yes.
Our system is not like that. It's direct. And so you can proportionally represent people in parliament. They are not going to affect the way the power is now. What it will do is that it will strengthen our cohesion. Our diversity is not reflected in MPP NDC very strongly. Women, youth, and various other groups and their causes or their needs don't come up, the kind of politics they've been running. So you want to look at how, in a situation of polarization, you say, how do we get strengthened representation of other groups in parliament? President Kufuor's idea of a Senate or something is still part of cohesion, much more than affecting executive power. Unless you look at the power over the budget, and you want to constrain, take it, now the executive has it. Parliament cannot vary any budget.
No.
Without. So if you want to go there, then they would have to negotiate and say, in fact, the power should be in Parliament, or a good part of it, or a critical part of it. So no president is able to run without listening to Parliament. But we are not there yet. I think the most important thing we have to look at is that we have to open up the executive governance sphere. We need more than one election. Okay? We shouldn't shy away from electing metropolitan municipal chief executives. In fact, we can even be bolder in looking at regional. After all, Kenya is a unitary state.
Yes.
They've done it. And it has strengthened their sense of nationhood. They've agreed on revenue. They've gone devolution.
Yes.
It's still a presidential system. Their presidency is not anchored in parliament. And so there is a way in which we would have to rationalize the system, our system, so that if that is the case, then you don't need an Angela Merkel formula to govern together. But having people in controlling districts or municipalities or metropolis or regions, they would necessarily have to work with a president who has the overall mandate to set the development agenda.
You almost want to restart the constitutional review process.
Whereas I will agree with you as to a certain constitutional review change and the rest. I hope I'm not being pessimistic.
Okay.
If that cultural mentality in Ghana, divisive cultural mentality, which starts from tribalistic attitude, which moves on to cronyism, which moves on to even religious, call it this way, differentiations. If we don't work on those to create a certain moral or ethical base, where a person begins to see things broader than through the eyes of my tribe, through the eyes of my party, through the eyes of my religious group, I think, so I would say, no problem. Let them do the constitutional bit. But we would need to do a lot of education, civic education.
Exactly.
I was going to use this because it looks like
that is important.
It looks like we are spending too much on the top part. But, the presidential power is also affecting areas where essentially you are dealing with professionals and the management of our public institutions and crown corporations, as they call it, and those winner-takes-all applications come all over the place. I mean...
Permit me to say, you see, you yourself said it. If the president should decide to appoint from the other side of the divide, it is his own men who would undermine him. And the other side would say, we won't accept it because, I hope you understand.
Yeah,
so that mentality...
I'm moving beyond that. For example, in 2001, the head of NADMO was removed. In 2009, the head of the thoracic was removed. Those are the levels of kind of this I'm talking about, where these are professionals performing professional tasks.
But you know why it happens? You know why it happens? There's something called, sometimes we call it elite consensus. Okay, and I agree with Archbishop that you can't put everything in the Constitution and legislate in law for it to happen. It's also the agreements, the norms we define to guide us towards achieving our values also comes through some understanding. After all, the UK hasn't written every aspect.
They don't have a written constitution.
But there is an understanding that the politicians could reach. We now know that this practice of coming to power, dissolving all boards instantly, the firing people and wanting people in your party, the philosophy that I can't govern with you because you have a different political philosophy and so on.
And very often it is perceived. It is not even real. It is perceived.
So let them talk about it. Let them talk about it.
You are keeping Sammy out of this discussion. No, it's not okay.
She's a politician.
What circumstances could you envisage the CPP, let's say, accepting an invitation to join President Mahama's government? In what circumstances? Is it feasible? Is it?
No, everything is feasible, and we are open to all suggestions. But without taking in some of our policies, then it is totally useless. Yes. And and listening to us talking, I agree with the Archbishop too. That in the sense that if we don't have in our plan for education, if we don't instill those values from a very young age, then of course they'll be lost, totally lost to us. Because, and it is not only a lack of patriotism or or honesty, but it's also things that lead us to the corruption, mismanagement. I mean, all this.
That's the moral stuff you're really talking about.
Yes, there is a sense. In a sense, we are in. When I said that the winner takes all would be tolerable if certain conditions were there, if our anti-corruption institutions worked, if they were well resourced, and not only from outside, they need to be resourced from here. We don't have to wait for the World Bank or donors to resource our civil society institutions who are doing a very good job. We should do it. It should be a matter of priority for us. We have excellent institutions like the Revenue Watch, what is it, the Anti-Coalition, the Anti-Corruption Coalition. They must be better resourced so that they can check the corruption, the mismanagement, because it is not only the winner takes all per se, but it is all these attendant issues that make it almost unbearable. And then what is the whole aim anyway of democracy? The objective is to improve the living conditions of the people. This is why some of us are into politics, to do that. So if we only take select certain aspects of democracy, civil rights, freedom of expression, but we forget about the other things, the democracy of access to basic health, education, quality basic education, like you rightly said, the basic necessity amenities like water, electricity. Or if we think that is not necessary, and we just focus on, the certain aspects, yes, of the even macro development,
doesn't trickle down.
Then we are not doing ourselves any justice. And just before I finish, at the beginning, your commentary, you were talking about the chapter 6 of the Constitution.
The directive principle.
If we read it properly, if we pay proper attention to it, you will see that it includes all the things you were talking about. What guides you to decision making? The well-being of your people. What guides you? Is it the supreme national interest of your country, or is it other selfish or parochial interest? What helps a decision maker? Okay,
now just coming quickly, and then I want to move us towards
I think we need a combination of both. We have to look at the formal rules which define the space and enable you to do what you want to do. And we also have to look at the norms, the values, the ethics, the morality. The parties actually in the developed democracies educate the public a lot.
Yes. Very much.
Okay, and democratic culture is something you always educate people about.
We have a whole institution called the National Commission for Civic Education.
But the parties also ought to be doing it. I mean, democracy is taught and they learn. It's a learning culture. And you're learning and you're tolerating, and it's very conscious. In fact, it permeates every aspect of socialization. We don't have it here. So we have a huge dosage of our past. The authoritarian, intolerant, and look at what is happening now, the lynching of people. We just reported, but it tells you the level of intolerance, how high it is, and which, in fact, anybody could suffer from that. Okay, so our democratic culture is extremely weak as our democracy is becoming so consolidated and stronger. So elections drives it, that's one. Two, you cannot do the things that are directive principles of state policy, because we've designed a system that focuses more on elections than anything else. Some of the things that Samia is talking about, and Archbishop wants that, would mean that you're looking at structural reforms, whether it's economy, whether even it's education, long term.
Yeah, but bold decisions. I want to stop it right there.
Okay.
Do all structural reforms need to be done by changing the Constitution? I don't believe so. You gave an example, for example, of where now...
But let me give you why...
Just one second. Let me finish the question. Because, for example... President Mahama decided not to abolish boards, to let it run its tenure. Now, that's an individual. Do we need a constitutional change to
not for everything.
Yeah, exactly.
So let me explain what I meant. If you take, our system has been designed in such a way that we are constantly doing elections. Our polarization comes from that. Look, we finished elections 2012. Next year, if all goes well, we have local government. And the preparation this year or next year, the parties are going to do their internal. It's almost like a national election. Then when they finish and we go through all that, in 2015, the primaries are continued. It's all elections. 2016, they don't take any decisions of any meaningful consequence because elections. So a system that constantly runs on elections makes it difficult for you to then take the long-term or the hard decisions.
While the elections are running, somebody is there with all the power. How do we moderate that person's abuse of the power?
You need to look at the elections situation first and see why do we alternate? Is it a situation where we could probably realize that doing all elections at the same time helps, buys you enough time? Is it that we must regulate elections, election campaign activities? In Ghana, it's a constant thing. You lose power and the opposition party immediately withdraws to prepare for elections all the time. Those things happen, but they are regulated and parties are pushed into development work. Okay?
Yeah, but Doc, you see, so my problem is that all of that stuff is maybe necessary. But whilst we're thinking all of that, people are exercising power and exercising it in a very capricious and selfish manner. How do we address that?
You need both. Let me look at it from this point of view. What Doc is saying is definitely true. Yeah. We need to do some structural development, constitutional review and the rest of it. We would also need, as all of us have said, education.
Yes.
Educating the people. Unfortunately, the various sectors that should be doing the education are the ones who are not well resourced, number one, and number two, they are often used by the political machinery as against what they should really be doing, namely helping the people even look through the government that is in power. So when you talk about the national, NCCE, for instance, or when you talk about even
NDPC,
and the rest of it,
entrenched constitutional bodies,
and even civil society and the rest. Sometimes even civil society, we get already taken up with, doing what we call a fire service, quenching fire. Firefighting. We've never had time to really sit and say, look, let us now look at our democratic development and let us see whether it is going really on the path, as some are saying, for the good of the country. I would really look at something like that. Most probably what has been the problem is that poverty is getting more and more exacerbated.
Yes, and inequality.
Politicians, unfortunately, are cashing in on poor people and getting them as masses to say, when we come, we will change everything. And they go and vote for them. When they come, then they realize nothing has happened.
Or they change their appointments.
Or they give them cell phones to vote for them.
Nobody seems to be fighting the fight of the poor person who is exploited. And that is why
we are coming to the close. So let's see.
What I come to Samia, and I agree 100% that. So as I said, this winner takes all thing. We need to do something about.
But the point is that
policy. We need to educate people.
Shouldn't we
also moral education, ethical education, then put in place between the two what I call the machinery that would make sure that the policies that are there are being given real life.
My worry throughout all this discussion is that are we looking for consensual government? Are we throwing away the whole idea of democratic competitiveness?
No.
Because a lot of the discussion that is coming across seems to be like...
Wait a minute. The word democracy itself means consensus building.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say so. The word democracy means for the people.
The competitive partisan thing.
It should end up in consensus building and helping the people.
The reality is that...
It needs to come out very clearly because I'm not getting that sense.
No, the competition... That is why, for instance...
I'm not getting that sense
That is why, for instance, we do not believe that... anytime you're critiquing winner takes all, is share power or share power in what framework?
Not necessarily.
No, you see, but you can also look at the competition in a different way to focus on development. For instance, I believe that if we were to go devolution and we're electing MCs or and so on, and even looking at it at the regional level, and parties controlling certain regions, the development take will be higher.
Yes.
Because you would have to prove yourself. But that's not enough. The education bit and even the institutions, how will the civil service work, the local government service, without parties, trying to control them or undermine them? At the moment, there are a lot of issues with them. So there's a whole area that we may have to review and see how we strengthen institutions that must be impartial and not controlled by politicians. But we must also recognize that competition by the politicians is important, and they ought to have the space to do it, both in the legislature and in the executive arm. But at the end of the day, we don't have to change our entire constitution because we want to make these changes. What stops the president from saying and speaking to everybody, just as he retained people on boards, and also saying that, hey, we should stop this practice of persecuting or frustrating people. It's not official policy, but it happens.
Yeah, but that's embodied in a single individual. If Mahama is not there, can we vouch that the next person
that is
will do
why
that?
you then do the political talk. If the two parties, because they've done it to themselves, now face each other and talk and say, hey, this practice is bad. In Zanzibar, two parties like NDC and MPP in Zanzibar, the leaders talked because they felt that the politics was not going
I don't understand how that you're doing.
Hold on. They have agreed. They have agreed on certain practices.
Samia coming. Yeah.
That is, to an extent, that is good. But the problem is agree on what?
Yeah.
You see, what we are saying is, let us agree on certain priorities for development, for the development of the country. Let us make them so clear to everyone. We know what this country needs, at least. We know what we need to do. We need to manufacture, increase our manufacturing capacity. So we need to industrialize. Let us face it, we need to give jobs. This is a priority. And we need to focus on education, developing our human resource. So the parties can come together and sit and agree. But if they don't agree on these issues, rapid development for Ghana, nothing will change. There's no use us sitting, talking together, taking ministers from different parties without us refocusing and reprioritizing. I do not think, politicians or otherwise, I do not think in Ghana we are thinking of the well-being of the ordinary person. We are not. We have not done it for decades, and until we do it, there's no point. There's no point trying to think of elections without prioritizing development. So let's go back to basics.
The priorities are important.
90 seconds.
But we also have to look at political culture. And you see, a certain relationship and a certain way of doing politics has emerged, which has been counterproductive. You can't assume that it will go away without people consciously moving away from that. And that calls for a certain conversation so that those practices will change. And they will all agree we are going to stop this. It has happened in some countries, and it can happen here. So it's not just the priorities, but the culture, the way of doing things, which undermines even realizing the priorities, also need to be a conversation. And you can't use laws to change what greed or what somebody who says, I can only govern with people from my village, and so on and so forth. But they can agree that, look, this is not helping us. Can we do it differently? Let us be more inclusive, where we have good people and so on. And then they will define a certain procedure for doing it.
Yeah, I don't really like anybody to tell me that Ghana is now divided, split between NDC and MPP. There are so many of us who are out there who are looking at both of them because they are friends of ours and who would love to see them sit together and think about Ghana. And they can do it. It's not power sharing one is talking about. No. It's not consensus building on the drawing board. But it is this way of, look, this is our country because we have been stymieing development in this country for the past how many years? Stymieing it. Yes. When one goes into a position, everything the government is doing is wrong. When the other one goes into the same thing. That's the culture that I think we need to help out. The democratic culture is missing.
I think we all agree. See how it's easy to get consensus.
Well, we started off talking about sharing posts. We come to the consensus that what we need to do is share more ideas on what makes this country move forward. Talk more. The political parties, which are at least the two of them and others, need to sit down and think Ghana first. And when they think Ghana first, it will emerge out of it the way in which we think. We can agree on institutions and on norms and on ways of doing things beyond the formal establishment of laws. Winner takes all means Ghana must win. And I think we'll carry on the conversation to see how we ensure that it's Ghana that wins all. Thank you for watching and for listening. We'll be back next week.